We do welcome you with us this morning, all of you folks down south, and those who are on the internet who would listen to the lesson. Our lesson today is the value of the soul. The value of the soul. So many times people do not recognize the value that the soul gives. In Mark 8:36, Mark 8:36, the Lord said, "For what doth it profit a man to gain the whole world and forfeit his life? For what should a man give in exchange for his life?" I think that's pretty clear as Jesus understands it, as Jesus sees life. And he, more than anyone else, sees eternity. He says, now make a comparison. You gain the whole world, but you forfeit your soul. What have you gained? You've lost. What we give in exchange? There is nothing worth the exchange. You've lost the bargain. You've made a terrible bargain. You bargained and lost. You'll notice in Psalm 49:6, the psalmist would write, "They that trust in their wealth, and they that boast themselves in the multitude of their riches." He would say, none of them can by any means redeem his brother, nor give to God a ransom for him. All the money of all the wealth, you cannot redeem your brother. And in this case, he's talking about the spiritual redemption of the brother. It is too costly for what you have, no matter what you have in the bank. Now, what we have is the idea within scriptures is whether something is more valuable, and how do you determine what is valuable? We are indeed living in a commercial world, a world that is full. Every time you turn on the TV, you see bargain after bargain after bargain, and you want to buy something. You want to be sure and buy a bargain at its cheapest price. Now, when it comes to December presents, I tell Sue, don't look for bargains. Buy me the most expensive thing you can find and a bunch of them. Now I want you to see Sue's answer. Here's the answer that Sue gives me whenever you talk about buying a bargain for little old me. She would say, who cares what you want? Whether what you want is expensive or a bargain, it doesn't matter. You're not getting anything. And so we have these bargains that are in the world, and we have to determine whether it is worth it or not. How do you determine something is of value? How do you determine something is a good bargain? There are 4 ways I want to look at right quick. Number 1 is its cost. If it cost you the blood of the Son of God, you know it's of value. Secondly, you can tell the cost of something or the value of something by its permanence, if it's simply temporary or if it will last you some time. You do not want to buy you something that will break. It's not worth it. Well, a soul will exist till the world of worlds has ended, and then after that. Thirdly, you can determine the value of something by affection. When someone loves something, they hold that as a great value. Well, God so loved the world, so he sees the soul as a truly valuable item. Fourthly, uniqueness. No 2 souls are alike, just like no 2 fingerprints are alike. And there is nothing like a soul. So because of cost, permanence, affection, and uniqueness, the soul is truly valuable. But we're going to go into greater detail. We're going to see, first of all, what Jesus said in Mark chapter 8:36, that the soul is more valuable than the world itself. Moses himself was offered the riches of Pharaoh. He knew that he was Pharaoh's son. He knew that he had been lifted up. He knew that he could have all the things that he wanted through life. But in Hebrews chapter 11, it would say he gave up and counted the reproaches of Christ of more value than all the riches of Pharaoh that Pharaoh would give. When we are tempted to rebel against God's love, what we take to pay for our disobedience is the price that we value our soul. What we take to pay for our disobedience, that's the value we hold for our soul, but that's not the value that God holds. A story told of a 24-year-old British musician. His name was Knox. He tried to sell his soul for $38,000 on eBay several years ago. He was trying to start up a company. So he thought, well, I'll just sell my soul for $38,000. Whatever you sell your soul for, that's the value that you hold it. And I'm trying to say that your soul is of greater value than $38,000. A number of years ago, a Wired magazine reported that a 29-year-old university instructor succeeded in selling his immortal soul for $1,325. He said, in America, you can metaphorically and literally sell your soul and be rewarded for it. You can sell your soul and be rewarded for it. Of course, I would ask the question, he who bought his soul, when's he going to collect? If you believe in the soul of a man, then you know it's not yours. You know in eternity you're not going to collect, and you're certainly not going to collect now. So I would suggest to you his $1,325, he lost the bargain. Jesus helps us to understand the value in John 6:27. Work not for the food which perisheth, but for the food which abideth unto eternal life, which the Son of God shall give to you. Work for the food that will not perish. And then in Matthew chapter 10, verse 28, he says, be not afraid of them that kill the body, but are not able to kill the soul, but rather fear him who is able to destroy both soul and body in hell. He then goes on and he explains what he values as the soul. The fact is, he's already told us more than once that the value that he values the soul may be totally different than the value we hold it. He's the value of a soul is the world. Well, whenever you compare your soul with the world, you can see the value. But also we see the value of the soul whenever we look in Bethlehem, Matthew chapter 2, but especially in Matthew chapter 1, verse 21. And she shall bring forth a son, and thou shalt call his name Jesus, for he shall save his people from their sins. When you see the baby in the manger, and this time of year, that's what we're talking about, morning, noon, and night, it would seem like. And that's good to talk about it, but we need to understand truth, and we need to understand it not from Christmas standpoint, but we need to understand it from a biblical standpoint. We need to put Christ not back into Christmas. It never was there to begin with. We need to put Christ in our life and keep him there. And when we look at the babe in the manger, whether that's December or whether that's July 4th, we need to see what it's all about. And what it's all about is he will save his people from their sins. In Luke chapter 19:10, the Son of Man came to seek and to save that which was lost. And in John 3:17, God sent not the Son into the world to judge the world, but that the world should be saved through him. Obviously, the babe in the manger would show us the value of a soul. I'm going to cover two narratives. And as you look at these two narratives, very quickly cover them, you're going to see in these narratives that you can see demonstrated the value of the soul. As you look at Luke chapter 15, verse 3, Jesus has been eating with the sinners and the harlots, and the Pharisees and Sadducees and the rulers of the Jews want to know why. And he's going to tell them because he values them. He, in verse 3, would speak unto them a parable, and then in verse 4, he would say, What man of you, having 100 sheep, having lost one of them, doth not leave the 99 in the wilderness and go find that which is lost? And when he finds him, he puts him on his shoulder and he carries him back home, and they rejoice. It was lost, but now it's found. He valued the one sheep. Is the Lord telling us? Is the Lord telling us that sheep are worth $100? No, the Lord is saying to those who value things of life, look at how God values his sheep, his people, and their souls. You continue on in Luke chapter 15, in verse 11. He continues the idea, and he says, a certain man had 2 sons. The younger said unto him, Father, give me the portion of thy substance that falleth unto me, and divide the living. And so the father, of course, would divide the living, and the younger son gathered all that he had together, and he took a journey into a far country, and there he wasted his substance in riotous, wasteful, ungodly living. In verse 14, and when he had spent all, there arose a great famine in that land, that country, and he began to be in want. He joined himself to one of the citizens, and he was feeding husk unto the pigs. That's how far he had fallen. In verse 17, it goes on and it points out, he came to himself and he said, how many hired servants of my father has bread enough and to spare? I will go back to my father, and I will say, I have sinned against my father and against heaven. I'm no more worthy to be called thy son. Make me as one of your servants, at least. In Luke 15:20, he arose and he came to his father, but while he was yet afar off, his father saw him and was moved with compassion. Do you think this passage is talking about a father-son? Yes, it's talking about a father and son in order to illustrate unto us what God has in his mind for everyone who falls away, for everyone who falls into sin, for everyone who is tempted and is led away from the great spiritual life of Christianity, or of the original thing that God had for us, and that was no sin. We have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God, and God waits for us to come unto him. Yes, he's done a number of things. But here you see him looking down the road, and he sees the son coming. He is moved with compassion. He ran, fell on his neck, and he kissed him in verse 21. And the son said unto him, Father, I have sinned against thee. I'm not worthy to be called thy son. Verse 22, the father said unto his servants, bring quickly the best robe, put it on him, put on a ring, shoes on his feet, bring the fatted calf, kill it. We're going to eat. We're going to make merry. This my son was lost, was dead, but now is alive. These two narratives certainly illustrate God's love for man. This condition, this situation, this narrative concerning the prodigal son has been called one of the greatest short stories to ever be written. Of course, it came from the greatest author, and that would be God, because of the greatest care and greatest concern and the greatest compassion and the greatest love that he has for the souls of men. We go on and we notice that the sacrifice of Christ manifests the value of a soul. Noticing in Matthew chapter 26, beginning in verse 36 and following, here's what Jesus would have to say. Then cometh Jesus with them unto a place called Gethsemane. He saith unto his disciples, sit here while I go yonder and pray. And he took with him Peter and John, the sons of Zebedee, and began to be sorrowful and sore troubled. Then saith he unto them, my soul is exceeding sorrowful, even unto death. Abide ye here and watch with me. So he went forward a little. He fell on his face and he prayed, saying, my Father, if possible, let this cup pass away from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as thou wilt. So here he recognizes that on the cross of Calvary, there's going to be great affliction. There's going to be great hurt and great physical pain. And whether he knows it's going to last 6 hours or not, I do not know. The fact is, he knows it's not going to be a short time. Father, if possible, I do not want to suffer, but I will if it's necessary. Of course, it was necessary. As we continue on in verse 40, it says, he cometh unto his disciples and finding them asleep. And then in verse 42, and again a second time, this is in the middle of the night, late at night, early in the next morning. He went away and he prayed, saying, Father, if this cannot pass away, except I drink it, thy will be done. Verse 43 and 44, he came again, found them sleeping with their eyes heavy. He left them a third time. He went away and he prayed a third time, saying the same thing. Father, if possible, let this cup pass away. Obviously, as he's praying in the Garden of Gethsemane, and he knows the next day, shortly within 36 hours, he's going to be hanging on a cross. He sees that there is value in the souls to the degree that he needs to go ahead and submit himself to the crucifixion. When you see the crucifixion, Matthew 27:26, you see a scene which pictures the value of the soul. In Matthew 27:26, then released the governor Barabbas, and Jesus he scourged and delivered to be crucified. Then the soldiers of the governor took Jesus unto the praetorium and gathered unto him the whole band. I've read that 1,000 times. I read it this past week, and it dawned on me something I'd never seen before. I want you to see this. You are by yourself. You have just been attacked. You have just been lambasted by a group of people. And now around you are a number of brute thugs. These are thugs. They have in their mind to hurt you. Have you ever dreamed in one of your dreams of thugs surrounding you and your heart is racing? Surely we can see that something like that was going on with the Lord. I pray that this cup pass. This is part of that cup. You have this band of thugs surrounding him. Looking at verse 28, and they stripped him and put on him a scarlet robe, and they plaited a crown of thorns, put it on his head, and a reed in his hand, and they knelt down before him and mocked him, saying, Hail, King of the Jews. We do not like to be mocked. We do not like to be mocked by our friends, much less our enemies. But Jesus submitted to that. And they spat upon him, verse 30, and took the reed and smote him on the head. And when they had mocked him, they took off the robe, put on him his garments, led him away to be crucified. Verse 35, and when they had crucified him, they parted their garments among them, casting lots, and they sat there and they watched. 39, and they that passed by railed on him, wagging their heads, saying, Thou that destroyest the temple and buildest it in 3 days, save thyself, if thou art the Son of God. Come down from the cross. 41, in like manner also the chief priests, mocking him, the scribes and the elders, the Jewish leaders, the religious leaders. Verse 42, he saved others, himself he cannot save. He is the King of Israel. Let him now come down from the cross. We will then believe in him. He trusted on God. Let God deliver him now, if he desireth him. For he said, I'm the Son of God. 44. And the robbers also that were crucified with him cast upon him the same reproach. 46. And about the 9th hour, Jesus cried with a loud voice, saying, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani. That is, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? I must stop as we go through this reading, because I do believe this reading is clear enough for us to understand that Jesus valued our souls. But when he said, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? There are those who would interpret that to mean that when the earth turned dark, that it meant that the Father turned his back on Jesus on the cross, because at that time he was full of iniquity, our iniquity. And so he turned from him. That's not at all what this means. I call your attention that this is from Psalm 22, a psalm that David wrote that's filled with details concerning the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. In the midst of that, he says, I am a worm. Does Jesus believe? Did the Messiah believe that he was a worm? He did not. But those that were surrounding his cross did, and that's what David was predicting. And in the first, he says, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? Why did he say that? Because that's what they just finished saying. If he be the Son of God, let God deliver him. Well, see, the people were thinking God had forsaken him. And so Jesus, by quoting these words from Psalm 22, is calling the mind of the audience to the messianic psalm that was written 1,000 years ago that predicted the very thing that was going on. Jesus knew the Father had not forsaken him. All righteous know God does not forsake us. We forsake God. It says in verse 50 that Jesus cried again with a loud voice, yielded up his spirit. And the temple, the veil in the temple was rent. Boy, what a message that was. And it's just another verifier, just another proclamation of the value of the soul. I turn to the last point that would indicate the value of the soul. Eternity makes it manifest that the soul is indeed valuable. Why is your soul so valuable? The value of your soul is measured by its eternal quality. We called attention to the fact that something is costly because of its permanence. Well, the soul will never die. That's pretty permanent. So that means it's pretty costly. It's highly valuable. You're going to live forever. Your body's not. The physical body's going to die. You may live to be 120. I think the oldest person in the modern age has lived to be about 121, 127. I'm not sure what the oldest person now is, 116, 118, somewhere in there. Well, I will promise you something. Before I die of old age, they will die of old age. You're not given that many years. But the soul is permanent. In Acts 1, verse 9, Jesus ascended on high. Where was he going? He was going to heaven. And he's going to return. In John 14, 1 and 2, Jesus said, let not your heart be troubled. You believe in God, believe also in me. In my Father's house are many mansions. If it were not, I would have told you, for I go prepare a place for you. I ask again in Acts 1:9, where's Jesus going? He's going to go prepare a place. It's called a mansion. Verse 3, it says, and if I go and prepare a place for you, I come again and will receive you unto myself, that where I am, there you may be also. Here's what I want you to do. I want you to compare your soul with your mansion in heaven. Compare your soul with any mansion on earth. Your mansion in heaven is even of greater value, and your soul is even greater than the mansion that awaits, because your soul is permanent, because what awaits you, your eternity, is also permanent. I close. C.M., the writer of this poem, is talking about the soul. What is the thing of greatest price? The whole creation round? That which was lost in paradise, that which in Christ is found. The soul of man, Jehovah's breath, that keeps two worlds in strife. Hell moves beneath to work its death. Hell stoops to give it life. God, to redeem it, did not spare his own well-beloved Son. Jesus, to save it, deigned to bear the sins of all in one. And is this treasure born below in earthen vessels frail? Can none its utmost value know, till flesh and spirit fail? And let us gather round the cross that knowledge to obtain, not by the soul's eternal loss, but everlasting gain. The writer understands the value of the soul, and he says, look at the cross, and you will see indeed the value of your soul.